So now we are live on Facebook, everybody. Whenever you're ready, Mark.
Okay,
Yep, whenever you're ready.
all right then. Let's start. This is a meeting of the Village of Sherwood Hills Finance Committee in special session. Today is Tuesday, October 21st. The time is 5 o'clock. Thank you for all coming tonight, making the effort. Much appreciated as we try to plow through the financial agenda for 2025 and prepare for 2026. So Julia, as a first order business, would you do the roll call?
Mark Lederer,
Here.
Robert Suter,
Present.
Gloria Beach. Here. Kate Crowley,
Here.
Liz Heiner,
Here.
Marilyn Townsend,
Here.
and Sean Cody cannot be with us tonight. He said he would try to join virtually, but he didn't know if he could. So,
Okay, thank you.
and oh, look at this.
Coming in.
Hello, Sean.
John, are you with us?
I am just trying to get the the mic going. So yeah, just
Great.
a little under the weather. So just joining remote.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. All right, let's move on. Julie, have we complied with the open meeting law?
Yes, we have.
Fantastic. So the first order of business on the regular agenda is approval of minutes of June 23rd, 2025. So can I get a motion? Dietmar,
Also move.
you moving the minutes. Was there a second? Thank you, Liz. Any comments, questions with respect to the minutes? Hearing none, seeing none, ready to vote? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of June 23rd, 2025, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I'm
Those
abstaining.
opposed?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
No. Sorry. Laura, how are you?
I'm abstaining.
Okay, you're abstaining. Thank you. Okay, so those minutes are approved. You ready to move on, Julie? Okay, thank you. Next order of business is public comment. Opportunity for community members to speak to the committee. No discussion or action may take place at this time, except that the committee members may ask qualifying questions only. Speakers may be limited to 3 minutes. Julie, is there anyone who wishes to speak? Or Fred, would you like to?
Yeah, we have no one online, but
Okay, Fred, go ahead. You have the floor.
Just wanted to make a comment about process here. My understanding is this is the first meeting the committee has had in some time. And you've got both major issues, the CIP and the budget coming up. And I understand you're expected to make a recommendation to the board in this one meeting. And I was just shocked to hear that. I was on the finance committee for 16 years. And we were always involved over 3 or 4 meetings in preparation of the budget. And toward the end of that time, we started doing CIPs, but for the most part, they were pro forma, as they have continued to be. So we didn't really have a firm handle on what the alternatives in terms of capital projects are. And that's understandable because until recently, we haven't had the funds to finance any major improvements. But now you're at that point where we have some borrowing capacity. And I just find it hard to believe that finance hasn't been more involved in the process up to this point in figuring out what the alternatives are and how we could finance them and what recommendations ought to be made to the board. Because until that work is done, figuring out where things need to be, what they should functions they should serve, and how they could be financed, the board is going to have difficulties sorting it all out too. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Any other comments, Shabnam?
No.
Julie, you always want people to stand at a certain location. I
Well,
will follow
if
your
we can
order.
get you on camera, yeah, we're trying to do that. Thank you.
Is it okay if I stand here, talk to the camera, but also try to talk to you guys? Thank you very much for letting me have a public comment. This is my first time coming to your meetings. Appreciate all the work that you're doing. I have a list of suggestions for your consideration, ideas that were in my mind. And so I just thought I would share them. So the CIP process, I was happy to see that you guys have like a process in place for where Brian meets with department heads, gets feedback. All of that is outlined here very well. But I think that input from residents is missing. And also, when you look at the CIP, there's items on the CIP that would not have been solicited from this process. So this process outlines Brian working with department heads. It's unreasonable to me that the department heads would be advocating for money for the pool or for recreation. So that idea has to be coming elsewhere. So I think it would be helpful for transparency if that was formal. I personally don't feel comfortable just kind of telling Brian, put this into a CIP. And I think that has to be in this process. It would also make things more inclusive and transparent. My next thought is, no one really knows what the rules are for a CIP. So for years, for the last 5 years that I've been on the board, when we go to vote, it's don't worry about it. It's just a plan. It doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it. And then the next year, if you bring an idea up, it's what are you thinking? How dare you? It's not in the CIP. We have to stick with it. Another two examples is the website. So last year in November, we had to hire the contractor for the website. Otherwise, the $20,000 allocated for the website, something was going to happen to that money. We had to have it approved before December. But then with the $800,000 that we did not spend on facilities, that just does get carried over for spending for the next year. So there's all these things that aren't clear, and having a 1 or 2 page memo on what is the CIP, what are the consequences, what if the money's not spent, what if it's spent on something else, would help with transparency, maybe for new board members to be able to do their job well. At a time when there is such low trust, I think it would be beneficial. There's also the CIP format changes every year. So there was a 1-page Excel spreadsheet, and then there was like a PDF, 10, 15 pages of pictures of facilities. And then that's not happening this year. I'm just saying we should come up with a system. I was expecting to see the format last year, and I don't think we have that. Next comment, this is not about CIP, but consistency in fundraising. So I think last year, my understanding was recreation was going to have ballpark figures, $400,000 from the village, but $450,000 from grant money, $250,000 of donations. But this year, it appears as though it's all funded through taxes. So if it's the pool is an amenity and has to have fundraising, then I think the boathouse is an amenity that should have fundraising. Maybe it's a number like 100,000 per project, or it's a percentage, 10%, 15%, whatever it is. But if amenities, some amenities have to have fundraising, I hope we're fair with all amenities having that requirement. Last comment is reviewing of spending for cost-saving measures. I don't know if, I'm just wondering if that could be something that finance could do. Because there's audits, but audits are like, did you pay the bill? Did you not pay the bill? But I don't know, and it's not fair to Brian and a staff of 3 or 4 people to add this to their workload either. But I do wonder, should we be spending, let's just say $50,000 on computer magic? Is there a better way to do it? Should we be spending the way we are? Are there other ways to do it? And on that note, I had one more. I don't know if I'm at my 3 minutes. Just policies in place would be helpful. Like we had to have a board vote on Tom Deegan's proposal, but tonight we're going to be voting on $12,000 for due diligence, but the board did not have to approve that. That's money that was used paid for Sketchworks to draw plans in the Logic building. A little bit more clarity and consistency. That's all I'm asking for. I will sit down. Those are my suggestions. If anybody has questions or if anything was unclear, please let me know. I thank you for your time and commend you for the extremely technical, difficult work that you guys do. It's very, very appreciated. I don't know what we would do without you guys.
Thank you, Shabna. Julie? Is
I
there,
know this may not be appropriate. I just have an answer to one of her questions.
Well, I don't
it's not
think
supposed to
we-
be a back and forth.
Unless we're going back
Is
to
that
all
something
the
I can
questions.
answer or not?
I would
Yeah,
have some
okay.
problems.
I mean, some of the issues she raised, I'd like to address as well,
There's a
but
lot of good
I think if they're not on the
suggestions.
agenda tonight, we
You're right,
don't do
Mark.
that.
Shabna, I can answer one of those at some point for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to handle it. So are there any other public comments, Julie?
Carolee Mahaney has her hand up.
Okay,
Good evening and thank you for, like Shabnan says, all your hard work. I know that it's difficult and I really do appreciate your time and your efforts. I may not sound like it, but I do. But I want to reiterate everything, but I won't, that Shabnan just said, because 5 of the items that she had are on my list. The last item that she didn't touch on, or maybe she did at the end, I'm not sure, but we need to start thinking about, rather than a referendum, what do we not need to do any longer? I think we need to look at how much money we can have and what's that going to look like in the future and how are we going to sustainably support that. We just need to look at what it is that we're doing before we go and pass more referendums and just get into the idea that we can just ask for more money, because that's a losing strategy over time. Thank you.
thank you. Any further comments? Julie?
I don't see anyone else with their hand up. So I think we're good.
Okay. Then we will close that public comment period out and move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the discussion and possible action regarding the financial impact and borrowing needs of the 2026-2030 CIP, the Capital Investment Plan. So when the board met on Wednesday night, following the discussion of the CIP, what the board had presented to was actually 4 CIPs that the staff had prepared, 2 of them that included logic and 2 did not. And following the board discussion on Wednesday night, the board requested that the staff reduce those down to a single CIP and identified one of the 4 CIPs, which is the CIP that's in the packet. That CIP does not include logic. Board has yet to take formal action on logic. Presumably that will happen tonight. But the direction to the finance committee is to focus on the CIP that's now in the meeting packet and see if the financing with respect to that CIP is something that the committee could recommend to the board. So that's what we'll be looking at tonight. So that has been referred to as version D. And Brian, do you want to introduce that before we actually launch into the details?
Sure.
Share, Brian?
Yeah, go ahead, Timar, if you want to bring that up, and then can just go right on that very first page. So yeah, as Mark stated, we did have a number of different versions of the CIP for review at the board level this year due to the unique situation surrounding the potential acquisition of the Logic property. at the special meeting on the 15th of October, the board gave me the direction to prepare a final version of option D, which did not include the Logic acquisition. So that is what you see in front of you this evening, and this is what is in the board packet this evening as well for the board to review. A couple of noteworthy items that I did want to let the finance committee know about. So this version of the plan, we in last year's CIP anticipated borrowing in 2026 to address a facilities purchase. Given the Logic agreement that we will not be pursuing, I did not think it was reasonable to think that we would be able to turn around a new facilities plan in 2026 that we didn't have agreement on at this time. So the bulk of the borrowing will be moved into 2027. And that will be on the subsequent page of this report that DMART is on, and going to the page numbers here. So page 2 of the, report. Oh, I'm sorry. Page 5. Yeah, I'm sorry. We're back. So you'll see the admin new facilities projects to be determined. The 2027 borrow is where the bulk of our facilities borrowing is landing. Now, immediately to the left of that, you will see.
Hello, Brian.
Oh, yeah, I'm not even where I'm supposed to be.
Are you?
So.
So I am on.
You're on page 2.
I'm on the top of page 3 of the CIP, which is packet page 7, it looks like.
Oh, page 7.
I think it's page 6.
Yeah.
No, the
The
PDF.
PDF, page 7.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's page 2.
Yeah, so the top department line is designated administrative on that particular page. So you'll see the 2 monetary sums for the facilities borrow, the largest being 2027. And then I'll explain and it kind of coincides with what Shabnan had mentioned in her remarks and public comment, but 2026, we put a placeholder utilizing the money that was previously assigned for McKenna Park construction and a large portion of the pool building renovations into that facilities project to be determined field in 2026, with the hopes that perhaps the board this evening might be able to provide some direction on what of the various facilities projects they'd like us to take on, given that we do not have the budgetary capacity to handle a full village hall, police station, rebuild, acquisition, whatever the right word is that we're talking about, like we looked at with Logic and some of the Tom Deegan plans. So still to be determined, but that is where that money has been placed as a placeholder. And the reason for that money moving to that spot versus the 2 other locations for McKenna construction and the pool was that the consultant reports that we received back from each of those consultants put those plans in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million per project at a minimum to complete to the level of satisfaction of the respective committees that oversee both.
And what were
facilities.
I'm sorry.
So the boathouse
So-
and the pool are each 4 to 5 million? Okay, so 8 to 10 million together. Okay.
Correct. And we only had earmarked 900-ish thousand for each.
Can I ask a clarifying question? This is Kate.
Absolutely.
I'm tracking what you're saying here, Brian. But what I'm tracking is that these are placeholders, but these numbers look really specific. You know, like 422, 500, and 518. Are they coming from? What are they coming from that they're that specific? The 2 numbers in 2026 and 2027 in orange on the top there.
The 2027 figure was what we pushed out from the difference of what the original borrow was. I think we had the 800,000 dedicated, and I'm sorry, I left my 2025 CIP with my board packet materials last night. So I'm sorry. So what was the figure you were pointing to?
This is the 25 CIP. So we had over $6 million
Yeah, correct.
between 2025 and 2026 for facilities project, right?
Really trying hard to figure out what page you're on right
Okay.
now.
Right now I'm referring to the 2025 to 2029 CIP. In other words, what do we have last year allocated for these projects? Okay, and so what you see in the current CIP, or the proposed CIP, is the 3,625,000 in 2026 and the 4,541,000 in 2027. Okay, so
on the screen right there too, in case everyone.
But so, just so everyone's on this, page 3 or page 7. If you're looking at the PDF, it's page 7. And if you're looking at the hard copy, we're talking about page 3. And I'm making that clear, not for your benefit, Mark, but because, yeah, exactly. So everybody can just be
Makes
looking at
total
the
sense.
same information.
But my question echoes Kate. Where do these actual numbers? Is there an original document somewhere that says this facility is blah, this facility is something else? Where did you get these numbers?
There is, to my knowledge, no such document, because we don't have a plan for renovating this building. We don't have a plan for renovating the DPW building or even the pool. What we got reports, right? The Raymaker and Findorf did a detailed report on the pool facility and said that was $5 million to replace that facility. Tom Deegan did reports renovating this facility, which were well in excess of that $5 million figure. And then there were the 3-story option, the 2-story option for the Public Works building. All these projects were far beyond our budget. And certainly when you combine the projects, it would be even more difficult. So where we started out last year in the approved 2025 to 2029 CIP was $900,000 for facilities this year, of which we have spent nothing like that sum, and a almost $6 million borrowing next year. Those were placeholders. There was no plan that will tie out to those numbers. That's what felt to be that we had the capacity to borrow, and that the projects themselves would be identified in the course of time as the board started to identify specific buildings and specific processes. That hasn't happened yet either. But what we face is our debt is dropping off significantly. The village has very little debt at the moment, which means that the tax rate that the villages, the residents will pay with respect to that debt will go down considerably. And you can see that if you scroll down a ways, it's the last of the charts that Brad put together at Baird, and it shows the drop off of the debt. I think it's one beyond that one. It's literally the last chart, I believe.
The entire packet?
No. I think he's got the.
Oh, no, it's not that one. Sorry. It's the third from the last. It's this chart, keep on.
Yep. This one right here.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. So this is the situation we find ourselves in, is that if we don't do these borrowings, this is what happens to our debt. It plunges pretty significantly. We only have about, I think, on the order of about $3 million in levy debt at this time. Most of the debt that we have is in the TIDs, okay? TID 3 specifically. So what happens is if we don't start allocating for these projects in the in the budget and in the CIP, our debt will drop dramatically. When that drops dramatically, all of a sudden the residents will start getting their tax bills, and their tax bills will go down, right? Considerably, because the debt service, which is normally allocated to the residents, won't be there. Okay. Then we'd have a situation that, let's say in a year or two, we said, we're going to do a project. We're going to do this building. We're going to do the fire station. We're going to do whatever. All of a sudden, at that point, the debt would spike up. And I think one of the things we're trying to accomplish from a financial management point of view, two things: to make sure that we maintain a strong credit rating for the village, okay, to keep our cost of borrowing down and make sure that we have ample borrowing capacity. And secondly, to have a relatively smooth debt service so that we don't end up with the residents 1 year paying X dollars in taxes because our debt is way down. And then the next year they get their tax bill and find out that it's jumped considerably because now we're borrowing for the project. So I think the notion behind this, and Brad can, I think he's online, right? And he can speak to this more. But the notion was that if we borrowed this year and next year, even though we didn't know the project, we'd be able to keep our debt service relatively level, which is that top line. And so we wouldn't see these great fluctuations in taxes. And in the course of time, the village would, the board would decide on the projects that would actually support that, be funded by that borrowing. So I think that was the strategy. Brad, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
I want to weigh in a little bit on this because
Well,
getting to the issue of how this,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think you really covered exactly how we were planning for consistency from budget year to budget year. It was really one of the goals in developing the financing mechanism to fund the CIP that you're considering. So when you look at that reddish colored line towards the top, what we've accomplished with this plan is changes in the annual debt service levy, debt service mill rate of just pennies per year. We've got 2 to 3 cent changes all the way through 2030, and then we actually see that drop in 2030. So in this financing plan would fund everything that's included in the CIP on the table tonight. And in fact, there's a placeholder for this plan goes beyond the life of your CIP. So I do have a placeholder in here for a potential $10 million facilities project out in 2034. So I've modeled that into this plan. So, and even with that additional 10 million in 34, the mill rate would be less than, it's projected to be less than it is today and really for the next handful of years.
So I think what we're trying, go ahead, Gloria.
So the question I thought was, where did you get the 3 million, the 3.4?
So,
Where did you get that from?
so
And it sounds like what the driving interest here is smoothing. And that it sounds like we don't know what the 3.4 will be spent on, but that is almost a plug number. Is that a fair thing to say?
I go a little bit beyond that, and Brian, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a pivot going on in the sense that the focus previously was on logic and on this building, but the long-term focus for many years has been on the Public Works building. And there are some specific improvements that can be made in that building, raising the roof a bit, adding insulation, redoing the electrical. So some fairly definitive projects that can be done. And I think that when you start thinking about the budget for those projects, that's where you're coming up with maybe $2 million, $3 million to do those things in Public Works. So I think it isn't just a matter of what the capacity was or what we could do to smooth out the debt, but also because we did see, at least some of us saw, a need to do something sooner in Public Works that we could do without going through the same process that we need to do with respect to this building and the community center. I think we're closer on public works. I don't know if that fully answers your question or you have a follow-up.
It does, because you're saying effectively we've got 2 point plus, okay, 2 point plus towards public works. We've heard over and over again that they need a higher ceiling. We've heard over and over again about the electrical situation.
Yep.
And now, they're cold insulation. We need better insulation. So I think that a lot of residents, and so this makes me think about Bob Falk's presentation, like 2 million, right? So this is that. But then the difference, 3.4 minus 2. So let's round it and say we've got $1 million difference. That $1 million will be used, then we're kind of anticipating that it's going to be used towards planning for village facilities, future village facilities. Because I'm just trying to get at, like, I understand the smoothing, but I think with the way you were initially describing it, you're describing it, I think, very correctly, but I want to caution, because a lot of taxpayers might hear, well, wait a minute, my taxes are about to go down and these folks want to artificially keep them higher. And I mean, I understand what you're saying with smoothing, but I think it really is about, if you're used to paying $10,000 every year for property taxes, for sure, Part T, if it goes down to 5,000 next year. But if then the subsequent year goes up to 15,000, oh my gosh, because last year it was 5,000, now it's 15,000. What the heck are you guys doing? So I think that's the general, when you're talking about smoothing, it's not just because we have to keep the debt higher. It's because we're really wanting people to be able to budget at home appropriately so that they're not getting a sticker shock and thinking, well, what the heck?
I think that's very fair summation of what's going on here. And the only reason why I sort of hesitated on it is that the board yet has not been maybe as explicit as I have been with respect to the public works projects and the like, but hopefully that's the start of that will be tonight when the board talks about, okay, now we're doing this pivot and we have a variety of needs, and which ones are we going to focus on first and how much money is going to be required. And I think the focus will be on public works, and I think it will be the first of these projects, but the board is going to have to kind of clarify that, I think. But that's where we are. So that's where that number kind of comes from. And as you say, there's other projects, the planning for the pool project, of eventual renovation or replacement of that facility, the planning for this very building. And that's sort of the difference, if you will, between perhaps the 2 million for public works in 2026 and 3.4 million that's being borrowed. Marilyn.
Did you want to go?
No, please go ahead. I'll go after you.
I think part of the frustration we see, I can understand the importance of borrowing in order to even things out and not surprise folks. And we have a number of projects that would benefit from borrowed money. I think the frustration of the residents are, it appears that with all these placeholders, there has never been, I have not seen at the board level, that they say, okay, we have this, this, and this, we're giving this priority. Instead, what we heard during the previous administrator is, okay, the priority is public works. I thought, where did that come from? The priority had in part been focusing on the roads. There had been talk by the residents about the community center, but to date, and I didn't see anything coming out of the October 15th board meeting, there had never been that nitty-gritty of how do we plan what the priorities are. And as the trustee said this evening, what is the residents' input? Now, residents, to the extent they've ever been asked for their input, have instead been asked for a wish list. What would you like? Oh, we would like police. We would like this. We would like that. But there had never been an attempt to connect the wish list with what it would cost. And then to ask the residents, okay, this is the various priorities that have been named in the last 5 years. This is what's connected with that. And are you willing to pay for this? And would you be willing to have further taxes? Because the problem with the referendum, which I heard a lot about in that October 15th meeting, was the same problem with the previous referendum. This community does not, they're not anti-tax. They're a very generous community, but they don't like to vote in favor of things where they have a sense the board has put it together without rhyme or reason. So, I'm facing the same dilemma tonight. And I listen to the board say, well, what about this? What about that? And I think, wow, they're no closer to saying, okay, this is where we want to go. We're making a decision. We're going to get the resident input as to this or that, and then move forward. But it just seems like every meeting is everyone's wish list without focusing on how do we get there. And so my concerns, which I've had ongoing.
And I'd like to dovetail on that because that's my impression too, is that the board is saying to staff, this is what we want, make it happen. And then staff is put into the position of making something happen that isn't necessarily based in numbers. And I'm not directing this at you, Mark. I'm saying
Sorry.
from the board, it's just my feeling is that I feel like we're really putting staff into this position of recurrently spinning straw into gold. And I don't think it's fair. I do appreciate this CIP more than the ones that I've seen before. I will say this is that I appreciate this, but even this is the 4th iteration of CIP. And it's a lot to ask of staff. And, when we're asking of staff, I really feel like, are we actually asking or are we demanding? Can staff say no? And I don't think it's appropriate for staff to say no. I don't think it's appropriate. But I'm saying is that when we're asking, it's kind of a euphemism, isn't it? And I think we've really burdened our staff, and I'm regretful for that.
Yeah, it's been a messy process. I will give you that. Dietmar, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to give me a comment?
I know Kate's got her hand up too.
Yeah, I just wanted to let Mark know.
I think I don't want to lose sight of actually getting into more of the nitty-gritty detail of what Brian wants to talk about and really walk us through the process. But just from a philosophical standpoint, my perspective, I think it's important for you all to hear this, for anybody that's watching to hear this as well. I think what this all ties back to, or a lot of the things that really tie together here, at the risk of repeating what you all said, is we have capital needs. And the village simply has capital needs that have been underserved, underfunded over a period of time. We have an opportunity now to take on debt that is consistent with where debt services were before. So back to that consistency need. And yes, I acknowledge too that over the course, certainly what I believe to be, and I don't mean this in the pejorative, but for the last 5 months have been somewhat of a waste of time, right? It's sort of this lack of direction and lack of focus, or the inability to get a firm direction to work within the framework of what we have. I think there was an attempt that didn't work out, so on and so forth. So as we step forward as a body, I've shared this at other board meetings. I believe I have a clear direction of what I would like to see happen with staff input, with resident support through different channels. But again, it takes all 7 of us, or the majority of 7 people, to set a direction in all of it. So for the time being, I think we're stuck with what Brian and Julie tried to do of, hey, here are the high watermarks up on the screen of what we can do and what we have to fit projects into. And yes, this is the chicken and egg conversation. What comes first, right? The plan and then the dollar amount to then set a budget to, or a budget and then a plan to get to that dollar amount. And this isn't unusual, right? This is what I would like to describe I do for a living to some extent, that there's an expectation of having a set budget or a budget framework, then identify projects, facilities projects, I should say. Sorry, let me clarify that. And then understand what can we get for those dollars and go through a process of designing, iterating, permutations of design, so on and so forth. So why am I bringing this up? Because Marilyn, you and I have talked before, right? We have so many needs to go around. How do we identify it and sprinkle around the money to make things happen? And that dilemma of direction, well, like Mark says, that's the messy process of democracy as well. The fact that we spent the last 5 months talking about the logic, well, I can tell you that I think that was a dead end whole road, but others do not, and it takes the majority of the body to set direction. So here we are. Let's focus and move forward. Maybe I've just rambled here in the end, but maybe you find it helpful to just kind of set the framework and what's in front of us, to make a recommendation not necessarily rooted in what the projects are specifically, but like how we've talked about it as a committee, that we're really looking at the financing scheme and mechanisms, and if the decisions are sound within that framework, right? Is it important to all of us as we represent our constituents to follow what Brian had laid out in this iteration, which is to keep that consistency in debt service? Or does the majority of this body believe, no, it shouldn't be consistent and we should drop down in debt and then do something else, right? I think this is part of the conversation of what we're trying to have. So anyway, I've rambled. Hopefully you find this helpful. If not, Kate, I guess it's not mine to call. Mark, you have the
No,
floor.
it's okay. Kate, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Dietmar, I know that if you rambled, then you saved me from rambling because I had some of the same rambles to share. So thank you for rambling on my behalf. To summarize the ramble, and then I'll make my productive comment. The ramble I was going to give was sort of the same. Like this is where we are. Some of us don't love how we got here, myself included, but we're at a point where we don't know what the projects are. The board needs to come together and decide what the priorities are in a scenario where we don't pursue logic, as it seems where we are. And if that's where we are today, that's where we are today. And we need to have placeholder numbers, and that's fine. My thought, which is really a question, is in the interest of having a consistent levy, and since we don't have projects, does it make sense for these two numbers, 3.4 million and 4.5 million that are up here, to be spread over 3 years? Because when you look at the graph that you had up a moment ago, Dietmar, with the red line, it does go up. We have the levy for the debt going up, and it's going up in years where we also are going to have operating constraints because the TIDs haven't expired yet. So to manage the levy from 2026 until 2031, is that when the second TID expires of the 3? Are we better off spreading out some of these capital projects because we're doing them in different buildings now, right? We're not doing it all on logic, and planning for even more consistent levy than this shows, because I realize it's pennies on the dollar, as Brad said, but it's pennies, but it's pennies on every $1,000. And if there's also a referendum to increase the operating levy, we could be talking about more than pennies on every $1,000.
Could I just make a comment on that? Just a clarifying comment. Mark?
Mark, he's asking for
Yeah.
permission.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Mark, he's asking for permission.
He's
Okay.
muted. There it goes.
Okay, regarding this graph that's up on the screen, that does include the anticipated closing of the TID districts. So that increase in value is factored in just for clarity. So in other words, I wouldn't expect a significant drop because of those closings. We're already including that in our calculations.
Oh, thank you, Brad. I guess thank you for that point because it helps me clarify my point. I'm talking about how the red line sort of goes up and down. So it comes down when the TIDs expire, I assume. And then the red line, I mean, I know we're only talking about going up from 1.6 to 1.83, maybe that's what that is. But I think it could be especially burdensome if those are years where we're also asking for a referendum to increase the operating levy. And can we make that red line more flat and avoid this 20-cent?
Yeah, I mean, we could make that line more flat, but we would have to see a reduction in projects to flatten that line. So, and I think,
We'd have to tighten our belt.
right. And
Right,
I'd also like to just point out that this financing plan only includes material or project costs that are in the CIP in front of you, with the exception of the 2034 issuance. So to the extent there's projects in 2031, 2032, 2033, there's a nice space here where we have that drop that the village could layer in potential future capital needs.
Liz?
Yeah, I have a question, and it has to do with the that graph with the 25%, where we actually go over our, where we go over our policy.
Read your mind, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, as long as these are placeholders, I was just wondering why we didn't use a placeholder that would not have bumped us up over the 25% thing. And also, Brad, I was looking at this, and does that graph include the 2027 borrowing and everything else? Because I just got confused because we don't have, you show the hypothetical financing illustration for 25 and 26, but not 27. So.
Yeah, this graph includes all future financings that are reflected in the financing plan.
Okay, so it includes like tally ho. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that was my. That would have been my only thing is I wish it would just. We could adhere to our policy as long as these are just placeholders, but I'm not going to have you redo everything.
Well, and I think that raises a point that I've made before about the fact that often when we're given these models, we are in excess of our 25% policy, and it is a written policy. And I feel like we really, I think that the reason it's in surplus, it's in excess of the policy, is because of a couple things. We want to do things, and we want what we want, right? Like, so we could tighten our belt and do less and live within that 25% policy. Or we can say, okay, we've had this 25% policy for a very long time. Since then, the cost of living has adjusted. Inflation has driven all of these costs up. So when we're borrowing to meet the needs that used to be standard and used to be within this 25% policy limit, when we're doing what we have always done because of inflation, because of interest rates, because of just the cost of doing business, it's higher now. And this 25% is no longer realistic. And we should look at changing it.
I've always felt that way. And part of it too is levy limits, because levy limits constrain the denominator in that fraction, right? Because it's what it is, it's debt service. What is this 25%? It's basically debt service divided by budgeted expenditures, okay? So it's saying how much of your budget is going to pay the debt, including both principal and interest. But if levy limits say you can't change the denominator more than a fraction of a percent in any given year, and yet you're borrowing to fund your capital projects, you're bound to go over the 25%. And I've never felt like it's clearly an important measure, but I've never felt it was the sole measure for how we should rate the village's creditworthiness. Because ultimately, what determines whether the village is going to pay its debt in a full and timely basis is the income of the residents, because it's not the village that's paying that debt, it's the residents. The village is just a pass-through. And as the village continues to strengthen, both in terms of assessed value of land, if you look at the income of the residents have, the wealth of the village, looking at the 25% is not, in my mind, the right measure. And that's why when you look at the S&P ratings that have been done on the village in the past, they don't look at a single measure like 25% debt service coverage. They look at like 30 or 40 measures, which they've detailed in their analysis. And right at the top of their list is what's the assessed value of the village? What's the per capita income of the village? Because that's what's going to pay the debt. It's not necessarily the village itself. It's the village's ability to be able to pass through the debt service costs to the residents, which it can because there's no levy limits that apply to debt service costs. So we definitely, when we get back to financial policy, we definitely need to address that.
Well, but help me understand.
Yeah.
Help me understand that I just captured what you said. So we are constrained by our denominator, which is the levy limit. But there's two ways to adjust that. We could either change our policy and bump it up to 30%, in which case I'm going to guess we're okay on this bar graph.
Yep.
Or we can up our levy limit through net new construction. Is that correct?
We could but we haven't been able to for half a dozen years.
But we have to, as a village, accept that we're going to be more open to development.
And then that's what we tried to do, because like when we passed the.
No, but I'm saying to tell the village, tell the residents, like, look, folks, we got a choice. We can either accept and embrace development, and it's going to change our landscape, but it's going to help us with our levy limit, that denominator. Or we can go to referendum and change our mill rate such that we're more comparable with Madison, and decide that we want to maintain today's character and what today's village looks like, maintain it, but we have to be willing to go to referendum to increase our millage.
So we have options as a village. The residents have options.
I don't know that the residents understand that.
And they may not. And
but it's not because they're dumb, but it's because it's not really being explained.
Right. And I think once we get through the current financial calendar, that is this CIP and this budget, that will be the next issue that this committee will have to turn to, is this issue of both on the operating budget as well as the capital budget, and what are the options to expand the tax base, and if they don't want to expand the tax base, what other options are they in order to be able to continue to provide for the services?
Well, I guess I'm just confused though, because on the agenda for future agenda items, I've been asking since 2024 to please let's discuss PID. And I've been told by Julie that that's not really under the purview of this committee. And I'm asking repeatedly, please, can we have this discussion?
And we will.
When?
As soon as we get through this, as soon as we get through the capital investment plan and the budget, which we have to do statutorily. So we don't really have a choice. We're up against the wall on a timeline to get our budget approved.
We've got this October 27th, we've got to go and put it to the newspaper to publish. I understand the timelines.
Yep.
What I don't understand is why we cannot have this explanation to the finance committee, to the public. I just don't understand that.
Can I say there is a joint review board that will be happening in November?
Yeah.
The joint review board is about the TID. So we'll have more information. and hear
There
about-
will be a new TID report with them.
Right, I
Yeah, should be in
understand.
the next
I
30
understand that
days.
We've got the old TID report. I understand that a new TID report is
They're way
forthcoming.
behind.
They're behind and I understand that, but what I don't understand is why we're canceling finance meetings instead of educating ourselves in this committee and instead of using that time to educate the public. I don't understand that. So we can close this. I'm not going to take more time on this.
Have a definitional question on this chart. Can I ask it? I am confused.
Tell us where you are, please.
On page 3 of the hard copy, where it says the capital projects. And it has administration, new facilities projects.
Marilyn, am I on the right sheet?
No. You're on funding, go to the next.
That one.
Go.
Right. Why do we say new facilities? Because I think that's misleading to the residents. We should have renovate or construct new facilities projects, because listening to Dietmar, it appears that we're talking a lot about, or that's the intent of at least some board members, to focus on renovation. And the residents are a little gun shy after this logic last 5 months. Why can't we put renovate or construct new facilities?
Or just call it facilities review or facilities projects. I mean.
Facilities review, but
Yeah, I agree with it, because I thought it was just another logic thing.
Yeah, and that's what I was.
It's not the intent of.
This is really what Shabnam said about having a memo. It would have been helpful for not just the bill, but the finance committee to get a memo that explains some of the numbers. Because when the numbers are constantly changing, whenever we get a CIP, and I'm looking at these numbers going, what is this for? Just to buy a cheaper version, go in with a low ball thing for logic. So really memos to help explain would be very helpful. All of us.
And then along that line, why is the community center not part of a project? With and way buried at the bottom, because I've been listening for years to certain trustees saying the community center should be a priority. And here it's buried down here in school building renovations.
It's by department, Marilyn.
Well, I can see it's by department. I can see that.
Yeah.
But I think it should be part of the facilities department, number one. Number two, as Dietmar is saying to me, Marilyn, we're busy talking about priorities. Well, the community center is a priority for many residents, and that has not been heard. Certainly, one of the trustees keeps emphasizing that. That should be right up there, and instead it's buried down here. We can say it's recreation, or we can say it's one of the facilities of our community, a key one, like our village hall.
And so Public Works is part of admin, Brian?
Well, it hasn't been officially decided that's the direction that we are going. And instead of creating more lines in different places based on what I'm thinking we might do, I just put it for the sake of ease up at the top. So you're going back to a while ago, you had asked the question, where did this 3.4 million-ish figure come from? So there was $1 million as a placeholder in 2026 for the lead up in the 2027 project from
25 to 26.
or 25 to 26, excuse me. And so the rest of the amount that is making up that 3.4 million, if my memory serves me correctly, we have the two projects, the pool, the difference of the 125 from what the pool had for its balance of the 925, I think, and then the 950,000 for the McKenna Park construction, and then we're carrying over 770-ish thousand, I think it was, from this year's 800,000 facilities borrow that was not used as a result of the Logic acquisition and no groundbreaking on projects this year. So that is all formulating the $3.4 million figure.
I personally don't have a problem with the pool being line itemed out like this because I see this document as the whole thing. And I guess like it could be reorganized, for example, where recreation is listed first. Or
Well, but the problem is the community center, the trustees have never sat there and had a vote. Okay, Public Works, Village Hall, Community Hall, we're putting them in these priorities. It just kind of happened. And I think when we stick community center down here with the pool, by the way it's put, it presupposes that there's been some decisions not to make it one of the big items or priorities. And as you're asking us as finance to rubber stamp borrowing, but not projects. When it's arranged like this, then this looks like we're giving priority to projects, which I have objected to all along. If all is being asked of us is to keep the tax system level, well, that's easy. We could do that in 10 minutes. But instead, you're trying to get finance to rubber stamp the priorities here. And I have a real problem with that.
And to that, that's one of the reasons I think that the facilities project should not be named new facilities. Because in the past, we've been told, oh, it doesn't matter this number. Oh, it doesn't matter what you call it. Who cares what you call it? But what I have come to experience is that it actually matters a lot because once it's written down and it's voted on, then it comes back to us, well, you said you wanted a new facility.
And finance signed off on it.
And
I heard
finance,
residents say
yeah,
that.
finance said
And
you,
that is not fair.
not what we
for
want to do.
finance. And it shifts some of the burden from the board to say, oh, this is what we got from finance. They should be forced to vote on whether the community center should have priority, Public Works building, or the Village Hall.
And in fact, the board has done that in the past. I've been on the board long enough to know about 5 or 6 years ago, we did order all the projects. We didn't put price tags on them, but we ordered them in terms of priority. That was under Dave Benferrata when we were looking at that. I think even Shabnam was on the board at that time. But you're right, I don't think this board has gone back and looked at that and decided, okay, do we reaffirm what the prior board has done? Or do we want to make changes? And that's probably something that the board needs to do.
Mark,
That's
I
important.
would sit corrected. I would really like to see that 5 years ago and see if that's the same thing I'm looking at now, because like Gloria, it just seems there's a lot of shifting depending on who, in fairness, the board might be at the moment without any allegiance to 5 years earlier.
I just wanted to let you know that Kate Crowe gets her hand up. And
Okay.
Can I say one quick thing? This is just me, when I know what you're saying about the title new facilities project.
You know what? I think we really should go on and hear from the members of the
I
committee.
just wanted to say, in my opinion, I thought it was new facilities projects. Like, we don't know what they are, so these are gonna be new facilities projects. I don't know if that's the case or not, but.
Okay,
Sure. Thank you. So I was getting on board with the idea that these are placeholder numbers. But then, and so I'm looking for clarification here. Then Brian mentioned 900 and some for the pool in that 3.4 million, which got my head spinning a little bit because I was just an audience member last week at the board meeting, but it sounded like there was not agreement yet at the board level over, are we doing 900 to the pool, or are we going to wait and do a big pool project later? So I guess there's maybe two questions in this for for Mark and Dietmar, since you're on the board. Has the board set the priority of the pool? And if not, is this the right number in 2026 if we're not spending $900,000 on the pool?
And I don't think the board has decided about the pool, although there was discussion about it, and we really should say the community center. It's not the pool per se, but the board had some discussion at the end of the meeting on Wednesday night on that subject. The pool committee has come out, I would say pretty firmly, that they don't really want to spend the $900,000 that was previously allocated in the CIP to the pool. They would much prefer waiting and doing a major renovation or replacement of the facility. But the pool committee recognizes that given the cost of that, between $3.5 to $5 million, let's say, that's not going to be the top priority, or unlikely to be the top priority of the board, given what we've already learned in the process of going through looking at Village Hall and looking at Public Works. But that's something that needs to be sorted out. So I think what the pool committee is looking for is just to basically maintain the facility until such time as a major renovation can occur. And that's going to be a function of, you know, when the money's available and what the priorities of the board are. So I think that's kind of where we are on that subject.
Thank you for that.
Brad,
Sorry, if I could, because
go ahead, Kate.
It's hard because I'm not in the room, so I don't know if I'm speaking over somebody. I guess the logic of the CIP is hard for me to get my head around, because we've got real numbers in here that are buildup of things we may or may not do. And so as a member of the finance committee, I understand that it's not our priority to, it's not our prerogative to approve the priorities, it's our prerogative for their financing. This would make more sense to me. So given that we don't know our priorities, and that's fine, well, it's not fine, but it is where we are. It would make more sense to me if the CIP had placeholder numbers that were placeholders that showed the amount of debt we could take on for facilities projects that would achieve our objective of keeping the levy level.
Right, kind of a calculation of sort of debt
Right,
capacity.
like let's back into what makes that, what makes that red line level, or, this price, that's a little bit too simplistic, I realize. But right now, this is tough. This would be tough for me to say.
That's a fair question, Kate, and is one that I've posed to Ellers, who's doing the longer term modeling for us, to do just exactly that, which is to figure out, forget the projects for a moment, just figure out what the debt capacity of the village is, given the constraints of wanting to maintain a strong credit rating and to also retain relatively smooth debt service. And within that constraint, over the next 5 to 10 years, what does our debt capacity look like? And hopefully that's something that they'll be able to address when they present their financial management plan to the board in November meeting, maybe?
Hopefully I have an outcome of the CIP tonight that I can share with them tomorrow.
Right.
Sorry, I know this is my third time, and I'll mute. We discussed in our last finance committee meeting that there would be a joint meeting with the finance committee and the board to review the draft financial management plan. Is that still, that sounds different than what I just heard?
Yeah, there was a draft that was circulated, that was presented to the board in July. A copy was in the board, the finance committee packet in either July or August. But that document, to my knowledge, has not been updated, at least as far as the board is concerned. I mean, there's been discussion going on with the staff, but there has not been a second iteration of that 10-year plan from what we saw in July. But the hope is that once we get the CIP approved and the budget approved, that CIP and budget will update the financial management plan, hopefully in time for the regular meeting of the board in November.
That is different than what I believe we talked about in August. In August, I asked how we provide input into the financial management plan, and I heard that there would be a joint meeting to discuss the draft.
And to the point of the finance package in August, because our September meeting, finance meeting was canceled. The August finance meeting did include in the package an Ayler's PowerPoint presentation.
That's
And
what
I
we're
spent
talking-
quite a lot of time looking over that package in preparation for that finance meeting, and we didn't discuss it at all.
Yeah, it didn't get to the board agenda, and I think it was a chicken
But it
and
was
egg
finance, I'm
problem
saying the
because
finance, I'm
we
saying
were
finance.
trying to take that draft and update it with respect to the CIP as well as the 2026 budget. But all that fell behind our schedule, and so that process never happened. So hopefully it's going to happen in November. And we can certainly have that be a joint meeting in November when Ellers presents their next iteration of the 10-year plan. Have that both be a finance meeting and a board meeting.
Out of curiosity, what could that look like? I know I've been part of one, but I don't remember the details. Is this where the finance committee comes into the middle of the board meeting or at the beginning, or does it matter? It's out of curiosity.
I don't think it matters.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's up to the board, how it wants to handle that.
Mhm.
There have not been many of those kind of joint meetings in the past, so I don't think there's much precedent as to how we do it. I think it's sort of whatever's most convenient for all the members involved.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we kind of are where we are on the CIP. The board would very much like to nail this down because until the board approves the CIP, the budget can't be approved because the first year of the CIP, and only the first year, 2026, is actually folded into the budget, right? Because the borrowing, the debt service that borrowing entails, all that is part of the 2026 budget, as well as all the projects that are listed there. So we're in a situation where I think we need to either recommend this financing or recommend changes to this financing, but we need to get the board in a position where they can approve the CIP so that it then can be folded into the budget and we can get the budget timeline moving again. So we've heard the suggestion to change some of the wording with respect to dropping new facilities project and call it renovation and or new facilities project, something along those lines, which I think is great.
Renovate or construct, or, oh yeah, you're right, renovation or construction.
Right, it's going to be one or the other, or perhaps a combination of both. It seems to me more likely both, but whatever. But other than that, are there other recommended changes in this plan that they put forward? I mean, the one thing, if we had a bit more time, I would probably go back to Brad, following up on the point that Kate made, and maybe look at that 4.5 million that's borrowed in 2027 and spread some of that into 2028, and it would damp down a little bit that curve where we're approaching 25% or cresting over 25%. Frankly, I'm not at all concerned by the magnitude of the increase over the 25%. It's a very modest rise over the curve. So I don't think it causes me any heartache. And if there was more time, I would suggest we try to fix that, but we just don't have a lot of time, is my sense of it. And in any event, we'll be sitting here next year talking about the 27 borrowing. I mean, the 27 borrowing is not going to be borrowed next year. It'll be borrowed the year thereafter. And in the intervening time, there will be more specific plans with regard to these facilities and more specific borrowings. Where we're really more tying ourselves down is with respect to 2026. Okay. Oh, no, you're muted.
Okay, good. I'm back.
There you go.
I might be very mistaken about this, and in which case just tell me and I will accept it with our argument. But I don't think we legally need to pass a CIP. We need to pass a budget. And that's the part that Mark or Julie or Brian or Brad might just tell me I'm wrong about. And so I have reservation about passing a 5-year CIP when there's just a lot of work to do on the board with priorities before we come to finance. I would be more comfortable saying, yep, this is what makes sense for 2026, because 2026 is what needs to go into the budget, and the budget is necessary and legally required that we pass that. I have heartburn about approving a 5-year CIP at this point when there's still work to be done, as we've discussed tonight.
Right.
So would it be a
I get-
possibility
yeah.
to say we're approving a 1-year CIP to inform the 2026 budget that needs to get passed, and we're going to get to the 5-year CIP over the next few months as these really important conversations are happening at the board level and in the community.
But then what would your thoughts be with respect to Ellers and the 10-year financial management plan that they're working on? Because this CIP would be a big part of that. I think in addition to the budget, they're also looking for guidance from the village with respect to future projects.
Well, I guess it sounds like we've got a little bit of a circular reference there, which is we want Eller's work to inform the CIP to tell us how much we can spend to keep our levy level and our bond rating strong. At the same time, we're saying we need to do the CIP to tell Ellers what to put in their financial management plan. So I think it's, obviously it's not circular, it's an iterative process that we need to get through. And so I think that's the work that needs to be done in the coming months, is working with Ellers to get the 10-year plan to a point where we feel good about the projections, where we feel that we know how much we want to borrow to achieve the objectives, the policy objectives that the board sets. And then that would inform the CIP.
And that makes sense because as Dietmar points out, we have all these different projects, which any of them could take tons of money. But essentially, what we want to know is what is our capacity, and then we dole out accordingly, or a decision is made to give more money to something like the community center, which hadn't figured in on this. We have a lot of projects.
And I'd like to add to that it would then provide opportunity for the residents to have more input as to the direction that the village is wanting to take. And again, we have moved over the years away from the committee process, whereby the residents did have more input into how the direction of spending was going. And I think I am hearing repeatedly that folks would like to return to that process. We've gotten away from it. And it feels like we got away from it a couple of years ago, but we're still not returning to that process. And if that's a board decision, haven't heard that as a board decision. I certainly haven't heard it as a community decision. So I think that the board could use this time, if we don't give our rubber stamp to this 5-year CIP, and instead we do look at this coming year, and yep, I hear you that the consultants are waiting. I really do hear you. But I also feel like we're not being stingy enough with our time because we're canceling meetings and we're not scheduling meetings for public to have their input and to really, for everybody to really understand what's going on here. And it feels like I don't want to, the words are escaping me because I'm going to say it and it's not really hitting what I want to say, but it feels like a false argument to say, oh, the consultants need this and we don't have any time when we've canceled finance meetings and we've canceled different meetings that were, that I know, like, I don't know. It just seems like we're saying on the one hand, we don't have any time to do this, but then we're canceling our finance meetings because we don't have anything to discuss. And it's in conflict. Oh, it's all Brad's fault that we canceled. Look, he's raising his hand to say, I'm sorry, it was all my fault that we canceled.
Brad, go ahead.
Brad, I hope you know I'm kidding.
Yeah, I know. No, thank you. I think there's two items that I'm hearing here, and one is on this financing plan itself. This really does outline what the village can afford within its policies, or at least remaining very close to its policies. And from there, you take the CIP document, and then it becomes a priority discussion of the board and of the committee of what are the priorities? Is it a community center, a DPW building, a village hall? Because all of those priorities can't fit into this plan. So the financing amounts can be mapped out and projects left blank, and then you can work through the prioritization to round out the CIP.
Are we at a point where does the finance committee, they're not approving or recommending the CIP, what they're recommending is the financial plan for the CIP? I don't mean to rush you guys, but we also have another item and the board will be coming in and you have to finish up in the public.
And then just a worry, I noticed, well, I learned from the logic discussion that we have 5 police cars, at least that's what I heard, that would need to take the parking. So I noticed there's a thing for another police car. I just don't know why we need 5, but that's an aside, I guess. Does this mean we'll have 6 or do we retire them?
No, they go through the excise process and putting it up for surplus auction whenever they purchase a new vehicle. So the 5th vehicle, I think, is the vehicle that they kept for the community services officer, the CSO officer for parking enforcement.
So we have 4 police cars?
Don't quote me on a number off the top of my head. I got it.
But it's just raises questions when we hear the chief say how many people are working at one time. I think 3. Any event, I guess that's another address. But part of the way this is set up is with the project, it seems to have the finance committee, again, I'm repeating myself, lay out a priority as opposed to saying we can borrow up to this amount and the board will decide clearly. I mean, lay it out. The board will decide whether it goes to DPW, Village Hall, the community center, the pool, the police department. But the way this is set up, it looks like it's already decided. And it isn't, listening to the board on October 15th.
Well, go ahead.
I have a question for Brad, please. So you're saying, Brad, that next year we can't afford to borrow 3.6. We can't issue 3.6 in bonds. Like we really are capping out at 3.4.
No, there's some, if it's 3.6 instead of 3.4, we could make that work. Right, I would just restructure the 3.4. But but I don't think you could come in and say next year you want to borrow 8 million, for example. I can't structure enough around that to remain within your close to your policies.
I see. So the 3.435 on bond issuance, that is really because of that 25% debt limit that we had self-imposed.
You're on mute, Brett.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, no, it's, the 3.4 is really because of the other future projects in the CIP. So, including in 2027, we've got 4.6 penciled in, and then in, 2029, another 2.5. So it's the accumulation of the financings that are impacting remaining within policy.
So because of those future years, we can't go above the 3.4.
Well, you could accelerate, like if you wanted to do if you wanted to do 5 million in 2027, but then not do anything in 2029, right? We could develop a plan that would make that work. But we can't increase 2 or 3 million in 2026 without changing future financing amounts.
Well, we need to kind of wrap this up pretty soon because the board's meeting at 7 and there's some time that's gonna take to prepare that.
Kate's got her hand up as well. Maybe
Okay,
comment.
Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I guess I just want to underscore my suggestion that there's still some work to be done before we have a 5-year CIP. And part of that is there's good assumptions made by Brad and his team in this, but they're different assumptions than made by Ellers and their team about what happens with the growth of the operating levy. And so if we're looking at, and that's the denominator in the debt service policy that we have. So if we're solving for how much can we borrow and stay under our debt service policy, we have to make sure that we're using the same growth rate of the levy between our two very capable consultants who are using good assumptions, just not the same assumptions.
Okay. Well, I think we need to kind of move this along. I'm willing to go out on a limb here and make a motion. And if it's seconded, we'll have the discussion and put it to a vote. If it's not seconded, I'll try to come up with a different motion, but some way to keep this process going. So my motion now would be to recommend to the village board the financing of the 2026-2030 CIP as presented.
And are you talking about page 3?
I would second
It's
that
the-
so that we can open discussion on this.
Well,
Okay.
as presented, I just wanted to be clear
Yeah.
what we were looking at.
It's the financing of the CIP is the whole package. It's everything from the title page of the CIP all the way through the financing schedules that Brad presented.
But you
But remember, we're
specifically chose
only
to use it.
recommending the financing. We're not recommending the projects. We're totally silent on that. All we're saying is that the financing itself, if the village chooses to go this route, then the board can take some comfort that the financing is in line with our plans.
For 2026.
I didn't limit it to 2026.
I did
My
hear you
motion
say
was
that. Okay.
26 through 30.
Resend it.
I heard,
But-
yeah, I know that, but I heard you say 2026, which was in keeping with what Kate was saying, so.
So
I was-
the motion's been seconded, so discussion about the motion.
I did.
Laura did. Anyone?
Well, I think we should have the conversation. I think that, if I may.
Mm.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
We've been here before.
Yeah.
We've been here in past years and And that's this philosophical, perhaps difference in looking at what these plans present. And far be it for me to speculate how other people view it in terms of board members in the reality and whether they do put a lot of stock in the projects as they are listed or the types of projects as they're listed. And the fact that that's the direction that the majority of the board wants to go. I still view this, and most of you guys have heard me in previous years, that from a philosophical standpoint, I believe that the charter, the charge of the finance committee, is really understanding the financing scheme behind this and whether that's aligned with our policy and due diligence. And that's the jurisdiction of the finance committee. It is not bless, condone, approve, disapprove the specific projects which drive forth the numbers, right? The label that comes with the numbers, I view to be in some ways an interpretation of perhaps different input from either board members or the public or staff, where Brian sees priorities, but it builds that dollar amount. And then you put it into the framework of how do we finance this? How can we stay within the financing framework and all this? And then we get, this is the result in all this. I hear anyone that says some board members may use the excuse it's in the CIP, therefore it shall be done. I'm not a believer of that. I don't subscribe to that. I think as Mark, you had often stated that the buck still stops with the board as a body and the majority of the body voting on any given project, but it is not necessarily a rubber stamp to say, hey, streets are in here in the projected 2027, 2028, 2029, and the order of which can still get flipped around with the next budget iteration. So where am I going with all of this? I understand, Kate, what you're asking, or not even asking, what you're making a statement to say the charge is to only integrate the numbers as they're presented for the CIP and in year 2026 borrowing. But it is also more than that. It has to be more than that. You have to provide the context of what that borrowing looks like, not just next year, but also in the future years. And that's really that planning process. And that's, you can stretch that, right? Different people can look at it different ways and say 2027, yep, we wanted these projects to happen and that's how it should be. Or maybe a different board says, no, we don't want to do it that way. Let's go identify different projects that come with it. I hope I'm making some sense in all of this. This is perhaps for me to say that I'm okay with making the recommendation to the board. And I also realize that a lot more work needs to be done to identify the direction of the different projects by the board. And that needs to happen. And it needs to go under leadership for this to happen, to actually have the conversation, say, how are we spending this money on capital improvements? So. Laura?
Yes, we have been here before.
Yeah.
We are right back where we have been for a number of years. And the problem I have personally with what you've just outlined is that in theory, it's correct. I absolutely agree with you. But in practice, what the committee has decided has been presented to the board as the committee being in favor of this. And I have been in recent meetings where the board has been reminded, I believe by Julie, that, this is the plan and, y'all, you agreed to this and this is the direction you decided to go in. And this is why we have the plan. And I feel, I hear what you're saying about really, this is just numbers. Do the numbers work? But again, then I feel like, why are we even given line items? Really, this is a math problem. if we're really just going to approach this as a math problem, it really is just a math problem. And we don't need to know why we've got 3.4. We don't, who cares? Does it work? And when we vote on this, we are going to have people in the neighborhood saying, well, what are you doing? Why did you do that? So, I mean, we really have to be able to understand what are we voting on and have the trust that when we ascribe to the philosophy that you outlined, if we were to go in that direction and say, yep, we agree with that philosophy, that it's not going to be used then against us, because there has been this historical stovepiping and manipulation, that it's not going to be used against us then at the board level, that the finance said, yes, go on this.
Carol?
Dietmar said, and I don't want to misquote you, part of the reason to keep this list so that there's a context of what it might look like borrowing. And I guess my response is, if essentially we have to respect the residents, I can understand, and I believe residents can understand, the importance of borrowing at a certain level in the next few years in order to keep our tax base at the same rate. Because we have different projects, and that's been very clear during the logic. The residents are really alert now. They're, I think, very well educated. And because the board has spent so much time on the logic, now they're going to scramble and really look at which of these projects of maintaining our infrastructure should get priority. And that's why the Finance Committee, hopefully there was a separate piece of paper I could vote for easily, said we are capable of borrowing this, this, and this. Having said that, I'm a little doubtful why you need the finance, because we have the Barrett expert who already said this, but nonetheless, I could go along with that. But I think this allocation of projects lends the credibility of the Finance Committee to those projects. Ultimately, it may not matter, but it gives a little extra boost to whichever trustee is trying to use it to support their project.
Well, I'm going to support the motion because I think it is about the financing plan. It's not about the projects. And I believe this is a reasonable financing plan that meets all the criteria that we've discussed. It maintains strong credit access to the village. It maintains a strong credit rating. It provides a relatively level debt service. And I think that's the core of what we're trying to accomplish here. And when we delve into the projects, that's on the board. So that's where I'm coming from this. It's now 6:38. The board's meeting at 7. So I think I'm going to call the vote on this particular motion, and then we'll see what roll call. It'd be fine. Julie, will you call the roll on this motion?
I need to copy and paste so I can record this properly. What, ready?
I guess the discussion, your closing discussion, is there just no willingness from this body to consider what Kate raised as a possibility?
We have a motion on the table. Let's see what happens to that motion. And then depending on its fate, we'll go from there. But I think we need to deal with the motion first that's on the table before we think about anything else.
Okay, I'm ready to call the roll if you guys are ready.
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
Gloria,
No.
Sean,
No.
Kate,
No.
Liz,
No.
Marilyn,
No.
and Mark.
Yes,
Okay. Motion failed.
okay. So I will then offer a second motion. Now that one is off the table. And that is motion to recommend to the village board the financing of the 2026 CIP as presented.
I'll second that.
Second that.
I'm sorry, who seconded that?
Gloria again.
Thank you.
Any further
Oh.
discussion on that motion?
And a roll call.
Be a roll call vote
Give
again.
me a sec here.
Dietmar.
Yeah, just, I think I want to recognize that we really wanted a little bit more discussion on this. And I get the fact that our backs are up against the wall, which is what it is, but what would this motion that's currently on the table even look like in terms of a deliverable? Not only as it rolls through the approval process or the recommendation approval process, but then as a final work product. Does that mean that the information that comes forth and is published is basically without the other columns here? So it's just year 2026 and that's all we're looking at? Is that, I'm asking
Well, I'm
everybody.
gonna infer that you think that's a terrible idea, and I will agree. I will say,
Yep.
I think it's a terrible idea. I do. I think it's a terrible idea to advance a CIP without a 5-year long-range plan.
Mhm.
I think it's a terrible idea. But because what we have done year after year is we're stuffing this at the very end, we're basically painted into a corner, our backs against the wall, and we either approve a 5-year plan that people don't know about, there hasn't been enough discussion about, or we don't. And at this point, that's where I'm at. I am willing to agree to the 2026 funding as presented, but I disagree with being backed into a corner.
Kate was,
And I get
Yeah, I was just saying, we
understand-
don't have to publish a document. We don't have to publish, but someone correct me if I'm wrong with this, but I don't believe let me rephrase that. I don't believe we have to publish a 1-year CIP. I think we have to provide guidance. We can provide guidance to the board that the budget should be informed by the 2026 financing in the draft CIP. And that's all the board needs right now to pass a budget in time to set the levy and meet the state requirements. And then we work on the CIP. We work on the 5 years of the CIP, and we publish a CIP once we've done the work with Ellers. And once the board has had ample time to talk about what the facilities plan is in a post-logic scenario. So I guess in summary, I'm not saying let's publish this as a 1-year CIP. We're providing our recommendation that the board use the 2026 column of the draft CIP to inform the 2026 budget.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to have to address the CIP in the full 5 years at some point sooner rather than later. And I think my motion was only intended to undo the logjam that prevents a budget from moving forward, for which we do have statutory deadlines. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying it's okay to have a 2026 CIP with no additional years. It's not okay. But if the committee is unable to do that now, then the next best thing would be at least to get the budget moving so that can be approved and meet the guidelines. All this, let me finish, and let me just say also, the board does not require our recommendation. The board can approve the 2026 through 30 CIP if they choose to do so. So
We are painfully aware of that, Mark,
Okay, so-
because in the
Yeah.
past, we voted against a CIP and it failed 2-4-0 with one person missing.
Mm-hmm.
And you took it to the board regardless, and you presented it And you presented it in a way that said that the people on this committee did not understand the issues.
Yeah.
No, I think
It's on the
I
tape,
think,
Mark.
well, look, let's not go there, okay? We
Right,
really
but
don't
you're-
have the
but you're-
time to go back and.
Telling this, it feels like a threat because you're telling us that what we have to say doesn't actually matter, that you can just go to the board anyway.
Well, we know
No,
that.
I'm just telling you, the board has discretion. That's all I'm saying.
But we already understand that.
So. the committee
So
can
could you
do what
please
it
repeat the motion for Julie?
So, Julie, the motion was motion to recommend to the village board the financing of the 2026 CIP as presented.
You guys say you want to do this as a roll
Roll
call?
call.
Yeah, all right. Whenever you're ready, let me know. Are we ready to vote?
Yep, let's do it.
Dietmar,
Yes.
Gloria,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Liz? Yes. Marilyn
Yes.
and Mark.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Julie, do we really have, we're 15 minutes away from a board meeting.
We need to send.
You need to switch gears. So we're gonna, I think, wrap up this meeting, but we have a meeting on the 27th, that is to say next Tuesday. And the agenda, the first item on the agenda will be the discussion and possible action on the general fund budget, in particular, the levy. Okay. So there are materials in your packet, which, some summary materials with respect to the budget and the proposed levy. And we'll meet back here in a week to discuss whether that levy can be recommended to the board, so the board can continue along the budget timeline and wrap up the 2026 budget. I think that's basically it for tonight. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Marilyn,
Marilyn.
all in favor?
Aye.
Raise your hand. Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay, thank you.
Brad.